Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third part of Push Security's webcast series on the state of browser attacks. My name is Mark Orlando. I'm a field CTO at Push Security, and today I am joined by someone who I'm very excited to talk about. He is a cybersecurity veteran, instructor, advisor, investor, practitioner, uh, now currently founder of Vulnerable You, an online community and newsletter which covers all things cybersecurity. Matt Johansen, welcome.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me. Long time fan, first time caller.
Welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. The first thing that I want to get into, and I want people to hear a little bit more about your background and kind of what you're working on today, but maybe sort of frame our conversation that way. If you could just talk about, I guess, the state of things as the title of this webcast denotes. Talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of major trends, attacks. I mean, you're out there now in the field, like talking to practitioners, CISOs, and others. And so I'm interested just from your perspective on, what are the big things that come up these days? What's changing? What's not changing? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So quick background so people know if you've never heard of me. Long time practitioner, hands-on keyboard, like you mentioned, but started in like the pen test days and a lot into AppSec specifically. Wound up running the Fred Research Center at a big AppSec company called White Hat Security back in the day. And then most recently was running software security for Reddit, which included AppSec and ProdSec and things like that. So long time doing this for sure. And as far as trends, I mean, we were talking before we hit record, my first conference, like big conference talk at Black Hat and DEF CON back in 2011 was about Chrome extension security. And I think I could give that talk right now with very few changes to the slides, and it would still be extremely relevant. So, some big things haven't changed at all. On the other side of things, I think AppSec as a whole, as I've seen it, like without mentioning AI too early in the webinar, things are changing pretty drastically in the land of writing code and finding vulnerabilities in code and things like that. But I'm pretty famous for saying that like the modern web frameworks that have come out have like done more to shift application security than any security vendor had ever did, including myself in terms of like finding and fixing software vulnerabilities. It's gotten much harder to write vulnerabilities in code. And because of that, we're seeing all sorts of ways that the attackers can actually attack us without attacking vulnerabilities in code, right? Most hacks that we read about these days are actually logins, that actually like hacks in terms of vulnerabilities. So overall trending in that direction as we see it.
I appreciate that. And it's interesting that you mentioned AI. I might have heard something about that in the news lately.
Yeah.
But, do you think that with, Mythos and some of the other things around finding bugs with AI, do you think that changes the calculus very much on how many exploits we're likely to see? Or do you think that that's offset somewhat by kind of where the big vendors, the big browser vendors are on AppSec and or, risking impacts that might impact like stability and things like that? I mean, I guess put more simply, do you think this logging in trend is likely to go away given potentially the rise of, browser exploits and things like that?
So I usually hit this button when I'm like live streaming, but I'm going to hit it now. I have did you get that? I don't know if it came through on the thing, but yeah, I've got the Mythos soundboard of like, okay, everyone's going to blame Mythos for whatever hack is happening now because like the AI super hacker has escaped the lab and could like hack anything. And that's like not actually what's going on, right? So I think, I mean, you use the keyword, right, in your question in terms of calculus of like, what is the likelihood that we're going to be able to find those vulnerabilities? And when I say we, like, for a long time, these kinds of vulnerabilities that AI is good at finding, the types of people that could find it numbered in the dozens to hundreds, like definitely not in the thousands of people that even like had the skill set to do a lot of this. And so with these tools getting better and more widely available, the number of people that could find these types of vulnerabilities explodes because the skill bar goes down. Right. So this is like why we're seeing this whole Project Glasswing thing to begin with. like, oh, just try to run through with the trusted teams as fast as possible to like use these, the latest models to find the vulnerabilities that it's good at finding as fast as possible before, we release anything to the general public and stuff like that. But the way that I'm seeing it is, no, it's not some super hacker that can just like, Claude, go hack my bank account and add lots of zeros, make no mistakes, right? Like this isn't what was actually happening, even though the mainstream media like is talking about it like it's some Skynet, virus that's going to get out and do irreparable damage. It seems to be based on some early results, and I've talked to some of the Project Glasswing participants, and I'm sorry if I'm glossing over that to this webinar audience, right? But like the early Mythos participants who are getting access to this tool, it seems like it's just very good at finding specific types of vulnerabilities in old / like legacy code, which just so happens that a lot of very important software is written in that code. So I don't mean to diminish that. Things like browsers are famous and notorious for this. But it seems like that's like where its capabilities are actually really good. So it makes sense that, all the major browser vendors are like heavily using this stuff right now. But you had the, I don't know if people watching this watched the unprompted security conference, the AI security conference that happened a few weeks ago, that the CISO of Google, Heather Atkins, like stood on stage and like said that their stated goal at Google is to eliminate all software vulnerabilities, period. Like with these tools, right? Things for them, it's like DeepMind and things like that. But I mean, they're obviously in Project Glasswing. So to like the tail end of your question of like, is this login trend going to continue to go? I mean, yeah, right? Like the security teams with the latest and greatest tools and like the trillions of dollars of market value that is created around AI to like, is pointed pretty much towards this exact problem of generating as much code and secure code as possible. So of course, right, the attackers are going to say, okay, well, that looks like it's going to get a lot harder. And the CISO of Google is actually saying that it's going to go away as an attack vector entirely, which is a giant statement we could probably spend another half hour talking about. But like, well, why don't we just attack these people's identities and just continue to convince them to give me their OAuth tokens and then avoid all that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear you say that. I was hoping that's where you would go, but I absolutely agree. I mean, attackers have their business models too, right? And I think especially as these things, require more and more like compute, and I think what you said there was really key in terms of these AI tools. I mean, they don't provide you any like amazing net new capabilities. It just kind of makes the existing process faster and more scalable. And so when you think about exactly what you said about finding bugs in older software where maybe some of the quality control or, some of those things aren't quite as rigorous, that's going to speed up. But coming up with brand new 0 days that would never have been discovered in, pretty well defended applications, probably not the main concern here. If I'm kind of restating that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some, right? But like the evidence that we're seeing so far, it's hard, right? Because so far it's been a closed box situation around these like frontier models, right? But people are replicating the Mythos stuff with the commercially available models now, right? So like if you just kind of extrapolate like Opus 4.6, 4.7, GPT 5.5, like with the right harnesses, like people are finding the same 0 days that Mythos published, right? So kind of what you said is key in terms of like, we're just the ability to scale up these historically inefficient processes of fuzzing, right? Like fuzzing is just like a squonk, and to be able to like add an intelligence layer to that like normally would take like a very skilled researcher that was like pointing and being more surgical with their fuzzing to actually find these things. Instead, now you have these AI harnesses that can just like take, file by file of Firefox and run it through, like, Mozilla now is one of the more public people speaking about their experience with Mythos, and they're talking about their harness, and it's literally file by file saying, they're almost tricking the AI. Hey, there is a vulnerability in this code, find it. Like line by line going through it. It's like, this is just the kind of stuff that would have been much, much harder with the, traditional tools that we've had free, these AI models that tend to be really good at this. I think the other interesting part is they didn't train these models to be good at cybersecurity. They just trained them to get better and better at code and understanding code. And as a result, like, got really good at spotting bad code, right? Like these memory problems and whatever it was, in browsers, because they just got better at understanding what good code looked like versus bad code. So it's kind of a super fascinating byproduct.
Absolutely. So if we assume then that attackers logging in instead of breaking in will continue to be a trend, it seems like we agree on that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the, I guess, traditional, more established security controls that exist, and why maybe this issue with attackers logging in and account takeover, session hijacking, and other identity specific attacks, why those continue to be successful, even though we've invested however many millions of dollars in traditional defenses. So I'd like to just talk through with you, based on all of your experience as a practitioner, what some of the misconceptions are around identity controls and detection response. And specifically, I'm talking about multi-factor authentication, monitoring IDP logs, user training and awareness. A lot of times when I'm having discussions with CISOs around these things being challenges or problems, hey, phishing is still a problem in the year of our Lord 2026, and identity attacks are a problem. These are the responses that I get. I have MFA, or I'm rolling out MFA, or we collect IDP log. I've got all that visibility. I'm good. Or we're doing, user training and awareness. So phishing shouldn't really be an issue, or it's under control. What do you say to all of that? What do you think some of the misconceptions are around some of these controls?
Yeah, I think, all the threat actors also know about all these controls, and they've got really clever ways to navigate all of that. Right. So I think everything you just mentioned is hyper important. And I think that a lot of people aren't even there yet. Right. Like, you even kind of slipped it in. Like, you talk to some people who are rolling out MFA. It's like, what? Like, what does that mean? Right. This is a very known layer. And I understand there's like a usability cost. There's actual, physical costs if you're using hardware tokens, things like this. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the more basic defenses that we've had for a very long time. But every step of the way, attackers have figured out ways around MFA just in general, right? Like, for a bit, one of the more popular way, I mean, it still is, one of the more popular ways to roll out MFA is via SMS. And you look at things like SIM swapping, or a myriad of other attacks around just getting the access to those text codes, and it just dissolves, right? But then to solve the usability problem, a lot of the MFA vendors did MFA push. And so instead of you having to type a code, you just had to click the green check on the push notification that said, yeah, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is slick. It's like way more usable. Yeah, it turned out the attackers then would just send, 1,000 push requests to the person. It was called push fatigue. And eventually one of the person would just get sick of it, say, get out of here. Why am I getting all these notifications on my phone? It's supposed to be a bug, and letting them in. And then even if you look at the MFA codes, which is, if I'm getting increasingly better, right, in my MFA rollouts here, and you look at a code via like an authenticator app, you look at projects like Evil Engine X, and things like this that are phishing kits that the attackers are using that are designed with slews of features to intercept those codes. So, you're presenting the user with a copy of the login page that they expect. It looks identical. It's just on a different browser. They type their real password in, it get passed to the real login page, and they get presented with a real FFA challenge that, and they look on their phone, and then the attacker just proxying all this and gets the MFA code and the password all of the same attack. Right. So that's why, you talk about things like hardware tokens, which are, phish proof. Because there's no way to like proxy it and trick it. Things like YubiKeys are super important. But yeah, like every step of what I just said that sounded super simple, someone listening is somewhere on that journey, right? Like, no MFA to SMS to codes to hardware. Like the spectrum is wide, and there's pros and cons to all of the above.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that little caveat there, rolling out MFA. I don't think I've ever talked to any organization who has said, we have rolled it out. It is complete. We have full coverage.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Always seems to be some gaps there. And in some cases, I know, some SaaS apps, maybe you have to pay more for
Oh
MFA or they
man,
don't
the
support
security
MFA.
tax. Yeah.
The security tax, absolutely. And, I'm also glad that you mentioned this sort of evolution. And anyone who's been doing this for any amount of time has observed that, where we come out with a control, attackers adjust for that control, and then that kind of arms race continues. And I think what we're seeing now most recently, and what we've written about in some of our research, is that, now we're seeing these new attacks that are post-authentication. I think you mentioned that at the beginning of the episode here, where it doesn't matter how strong your MFA or your authentication methods are. Attacks like ConsentFix, and I'm sure we can talk more about that in a bit, but these things are post-authentication attacks where they're just trying to get, session material, those session tokens, or get you to, grant access to an OAuth app. And again, this is post-authentication. So they're completely sidestepping that control entirely. And I think, that's something that we've tried hard on the education side to clue people into, is that it's great that you're rolling out stronger methods of MFA, something you absolutely should do. It's very necessary, but that still leaves some attack surface
We still know
undefended.
up to be granted on the other side of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about some of the other controls and maybe some misconceptions. And I want to maybe just lightly beat up a little bit on user trading and awareness. And I'm wondering, what have you seen out there? What are you hearing around user training and awareness as a preventative control for some of these kinds of social engineering attacks?
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I like to think about these post-auth attacks almost like 0 days, right? Because like conceptually similar of like, oh, just bypass the whole front end layer of whatever you're doing. Like if you have a 0 day in a vulnerability, you're just in, right? Like, but then there's a quote that I always like to repeat from a friend of mine who was the head of security at Slack a while ago, Ryan Huber, and when he was at Slack, he said this. He said, 0 days are not invisibility clips, right? So the attacker needs to do something attackery once they're in. And so, like you mentioned, like IDP logs in the last question, and like that kind of thing. And it's very like, okay, they're in your post authentication. They get the OAuth token. What do they do, right? How do they behave? And a lot of that whole like first phase is just how they got in. A lot of the second phase is like, okay, cool. What's the goal of the attacker at this point, right? And I think depending on the threat actor, this varies wildly. You have cyber criminals that are, built in China shops, right? They got that OAuth token and they move fast and loud. They have no like stealth about them, right? Just like whatever, just trying to grab and exfiltrate. And you have nation states that I'm hearing are lingering for over a year with certain different types of attacks and not really doing a whole lot. Kind of silently watching and kind of behaving like the normal user would once logged in. And so it's like our job as defenders to like profile all of that, right? Because, any sufficiently sophisticated attack, I think the sophisticated word is a bit overused in cybersecurity media, but any sufficiently sophisticated attacker is going to be indistinguishable from the actual insider or user that they've compromised in these kinds of scenarios, right? Or it's like, okay, they've stolen the token, now what? They're going to probably behave and act a whole lot like that user would. They're going to click on their email and read around and click on their, G drive or whatever it is and start looking at documents and like, I'm not going to send off any alerts like that logged in person who's doing those things until you start looking at, geography and possible travel scenarios. And there's all like this. I think one of the more important roles in a cybersecurity team these days is kind of this detection and engineering type role where you're actually kind of building and profiling and automating a lot of the detections here.
Listen. Yeah. And that kind of makes me think of this sort of living off the land tradecraft that you're talking about, where, you have an adversary maybe persisting for quite some time and doing things internally that are difficult to distinguish from what a normal user would do. And I think previously our mental models were around persistence being, an endpoint style persistence where you're sitting on a box somewhere. And the prevailing thought being, well, if I have EDR, hopefully I'm going to pick up some of those persistence mechanisms. Whereas if you persist in a SaaS ecosystem or persist in a user account or in a session, much more difficult to key in on that, given there's no malware, there's nothing that would indicate that this is anything other than a legitimate user. And so I guess under that assumption, I mean, what would you say to a CISO who is concerned about this? I think I've got session hijacking happening. I think I've got account takeover that has happened. Do you think, the focus should be more on detection? Do you think there is any kind of forensic focus that could help here? I mean, what do organizations do that have these kinds of concerns?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's like an important concept to like internalize around that question is not to make any assumptions about what a certain vendor or platform that you're using is actually handling for you when it comes to security. I think a lot of times people use, I'm not naming names to like throw anyone under the bus, but if they use like an Okta or a Microsoft or whatever it is as like their IDP, they're kind of assuming a lot about like the security of that thing is bringing to the table, right? It's like, oh, okay, like, look, we got MFA and Okta and like, my IT team has logs and all sorts of stuff, right? But in reality, there's like a whole lot of security needs and wants and desires that aren't exactly turned on by default as soon as like you are standing up any part of this stack, not even just the IDP, but your cloud environment or like you said, the whole SaaS ecosystem, right? A lot of times there's like this feeling of, well, yeah, that thing is probably doing some really good security stuff for me, right? And will alert me if anything weird happens. And that's just not the case, right? I think, even vendors like Push exist. There's tons of vendors that I'm big fans of that, like, probably one of the better compliments I can give security vendors is that's how that tool should have worked without you, right? It's like, cool, why do we need this whole security third thing to like bolt onto an identity provider or bolt onto your email and workspace provider or SaaS ecosystem? And it just should have worked like that. And I think your question was like, what do you tell CISOs or teams? It's like, you got to really kind of take stock of what your stack is providing for you in terms of detection, in terms of response. Because we have to be moving faster as security teams these days. The attackers are getting lightning fast. Certain attackers have been fast for a long time, but I think the average attacker is getting much, much faster. We're seeing that in the data right now. Both from the time that like vulnerabilities or attack techniques come out. I mean, you guys have published tons of research about different ClickFix techniques and then how fast we're seeing them in the wild, from the time that like a new technique like gains success and popularity. The same happens with vulnerabilities. I know we're kind of steering away from vulnerability in this conversation, but a new vuln drops, those exploits are weaponized usually the same day at this point from the time that vulnerability drops. And that's just good to show like how fast attackers are getting. And so same thing with the post-authentication attacks, right? I've been kind of beating a drum that my North Star when I've been in these roles or when I'm like assisting teams nowadays. I kind of do some fractional CISO work and I talk to teams and I say, hey, we should be pointing towards containment and eradication in around 30 minutes, like 30 minutes and under is like to like put you in a scale of how fast we need to be moving from the time the attacker gets access to something like an OAuth token is under 30 minutes because they are that fast. Like they're going to partially achieve their goal, in that 20 to 40 minute mark and usually significantly achieve their goal over that hour mark. And so you cannot do that. You cannot move that fast without like having really proper stock of, what, if I'm using an IDP like Okta, what is Okta doing for me? Like how fast can I respond? Right? Like personal anecdote story. I've dealt with security incidents around these IDPs and some of the teams that I, talked to didn't realize what they could and couldn't do until they were in an incident. Right? Oh, I revoked that OAuth token in Okta. It didn't kill the 200 SAS tokens that the attacker generated once they were in Okta or in Microsoft or whatever it is, right? It's like, I thought that I locked it out. It was good. It's like, no, you got to go lock it out in all those SaaS vendors too, because those are all
Yeah.
separate tokens. Unless you do skim enable, there's caveats to everything I'm saying. But like, if you don't do this, take stock of your capabilities and practice beforehand, you're going to be, 1 a.m. With a pager in hand going, what the hell do I do now? Ask me how I know.
Play cleanup. That's right. And it always both shocks and encourages me to a certain extent when we go into a new environment and you get that visibility in the browser and you can see how people are authenticating and what SaaS apps they're using and what browser extensions that they're installing. And you kind of watch that web illuminates and watch as everybody's faces kind of drop because it's like, oh, we had these things solved. There's this whole other layer of activity that's happening. But I think, step one is getting that visibility and filling in some of those gaps.
Yeah.
But you mentioned ClickFix. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Another sort of hot topic. And I remember not too long ago when we were starting to talk about ClickFix and people would see that you would demo the attack for them or it would come up. And I'm sure you heard this as well. People would say, okay, so one of my users is going to get tricked into copying and pasting this really shady looking thing into their Windows run dialog or into the command line. And, that's the same thing as kind of expecting that they're going to open a shady looking Word document. Like, sure, I'm sure it happens, but, I'm not overly concerned about it. Fast forward to now, both with traditional ClickFix methods as well as some newer iterations. And this seems to be it is a huge problem. And wondering if you're seeing that out in the field as well.
Oh yeah. I talked to a fair bit of incident response pros who are like friends of mine in the industry who kind of work for some of these vendors that come in and help teams out, like when they're having their worst days. And I don't know any of them that isn't actively working a ClickFix related case. It is wildly successful. And yeah, like one of the issues that I can't stop talking about on my YouTube or any other content, because the research just kind of keeps coming out, the techniques evolve hyper fast. Like we said, and then they always go viral when the new technique comes out. And they're wildly successful. And yeah, my comments every time I post videos and content about this, my comments are like, who the hell would fall for this? Right? Like what? Like you deserve to if you fall for and it's just like, come on, give me a break. Right. And then it's similar to if I talk about phishing attacks, people say, oh, just hover over the link and then, you won't fall for this. If those tips worked, like cybersecurity as a profession would be like out of business, right? Like it's been over 20 years. We have never successfully, trained all of our users to actually spot a phish or anything like that. It's useless. It's useless advice, in my opinion, right? Like, you need layers of security that have nothing to do with relying on the user to not fall for this stuff. And I'm not disparaging users. I think any good phish could trick any one of us at the right time, given the right circumstances and the right level of trust building beforehand. You're seeing these threat actors even meeting people in person nowadays, right? Like North Korea is pretty famous for this right now. I know I'm getting off ClickFix for a second, but I think it's important, right? Like everything before the actual hack is just trust building when it comes to a lot of these attacks. You got North Koreans literally meeting people over 6 months in person. A recent example, like multiple times in person at conferences, and then getting them to install a browser extension or an IDE extension just on a meeting like this, right? They're like on Zoom and they're like, hey, we want to test out this thing, but you need to install this extension in order to see what we're building and then hacking the user that way after 6 months of trust building. All ClickFix or ConsentFix is just trust building as fast as possible, under some guise of an error, a CAPTCHA. I even saw malvertising. People were paying for ads to promote ChatGPT chat history link, because you can get a permanent link for a ChatGPT chat. And they were promoting ads on keywords for technical topics. So if you were Googling like how to clean up like disk space on my Mac because I ran out of space or something, you could imagine like a maybe less technical user Googling like, I'm out of space. Maybe I can Google how to clean some up. And the top result was like a ChatGPT result. So again, like it's very trusted allure and like, this is the ChatGPT interface, right? I know what this looks like. And it's basically just malicious instructions to do a ClickFix attack. And like in that moment, that user is looking for probably random commands to run in the terminal to clean up disk space. And if they don't know any better, they're just going to copy and paste commands in the terminal because they think they're getting technical advice. So they expect to get a bunch of weird code and commands that they don't understand. That's what they're out looking for. So yeah, I think relying on the users to spot this stuff is not a balanced strategy. So we need the other layers of defense here.
Totally agree with you. Maybe getting past the point where we can reasonably expect any user, even educated, vigilant ones, expecting that they will serve as that main line of defense. I think we're past that now. So yeah, totally agree. Let's talk about another threat that you mentioned at the top of the conversation, doing your first conference talk many years ago on Chrome extensions. And for some reason, well, maybe not some reason, maybe we know the reason, but for reasons, malicious browser extensions continue to be a pretty big threat. I know that's something that we deal with quite often, trying to, enable customers to get their arms around this problem. This idea of determining what is a malicious extension versus what is not, maybe slightly more complicated than it seems. You talk about your experiences with that and the evolution of that threat, or lack thereof over the years.
Yeah, it's shocking how prevalent still. I really, if you would have asked me in 2011 if I'd still be talking about the same thing in 2026, I don't know if I would have thought so. So yeah, I think one of the reasons the browser extensions are special is that in order for a lot of them to operate the way that they need to operate, they need incredibly broad permissions into your browser. And so you are installing trusted code into your browser. And one of the key concepts of my talk that I gave in 2011 was how everything was shifting to the cloud and SaaS. I think that's largely become true. I was convincing the room of that at the time. You used to like install programs that came on CDs on your computer, youngins, and like sometimes they would come in the mail. And you would own the software forever, and then that was it. And you paid for it once. And that has largely disappeared. And you put everything that you care about on the internet now, right? And you pay for it every month for the luxury of continuing to have access to your everything. Anyway, sorry.
No, we don't own anymore. We rent now, right?
Old man yells at cloud. Okay. So, but yeah, like that transition was happening back then. It is happening, right? Everything that we care about happens in your rent, period. Like your most sensitive operations for your life. Most people do not touch anything but websites, right? Like there's very, very little that you do that like important to you that like happens on your device anymore, right? Mobile's a slight difference to that for sure, right? But like a lot of times, whatever you're doing is in your browser. Because of that, the having these like broad read write permissions to like all websites that a lot of browser extensions have is a very juicy attack surface for attackers. Was then, it is now. That has not changed. And then if you just think about how some of the most popular browser extensions out there need to operate, they need that permission. If you like want an RSS reader, or it was like a popular example that I always give for dark mode, you want to like turn every website to dark mode, you install it and it pops up, the very scary pop-up that says this extension is going to be able to, and the wording is different based on different browsers and versions, but basically you can be able to read and interact with and even change data on every website you go to, period. Because it has to. You can't limit what websites that can read if you're trying to turn everything into dark mode that you ever do on the internet, or you're trying to subscribe to any RSS feed that you might find on some random blog. And so because of that, because a lot of times people talk about browser extensions, they're like, oh, just don't install these like risky extensions. I'm like, again, useless advice here, right? You're never going to like educate enough users what a risky extension is, first of all. Second of all, Like, no, they're like, I only have a few extensions installed and they all have the riskiest things. If you have a password manager installed, it needs to be able to insert your password on any website that you go to, right? Like, it needs to be able to read the login form on any website you go to. That's a scary permission, right? The other thing that we're seeing a lot more now than that, so I guess this has changed since 2011, is the attackers are attacking the actual extensions themselves. So what's been happening this whole time is like people tricking people into installing malicious extensions, which still does happen, right? But what I'm seeing more of is legitimate extensions turning malicious. And that wasn't a thing that happened a lot in the past. This happens in a few different ways now, right? So one is like a vulnerability, right? Like the actual extension has a vulnerability and can be misused by an attacker. Two, these extensions owners are also fallible, right? So you're seeing extension owners get attacked. This is very popular right now in NPM and pipeline, like code packages, but the same exact attack can mimic to browser extension maintainers, right? If their maintainer account is hacked, the attacker can push code and updates to their user base without the actual maintainer knowing about it, right? And we're seeing evidence of that. Third, we're seeing extension maintainers trying to make an extra buck. And there's like people out there that are offering monetization methods to extensions. So say you do have a very popular dark mode or RSS reader thing, and it doesn't cost any money, but you got, hundreds of thousands of users. And you're sitting at that as a developer going, well, how can I make some money off of this? The donate button isn't really doing a whole lot. Well, there's companies out there that'll rent your users' compute time and browser time and give you a portion of the funds that they get from that. You're also seeing threat actors offer that same service, but then instead of doing that, they're actually just stealing data. Another new one that we're seeing now is, again, that same thing. The maintainer wants to make a buck. They can sell the extension. So you're seeing threat actors buy user bases of browser extensions off of these random marketplaces and then pushing malware to it. So they'll spend a few $100, a few $1,000 on an extension that has tens of thousands of users. Maybe they profiled their target and they knew that their target had a certain extension installed, and they went and made an offer to the extension maintainer. These are the things that are kind of happening. So you got these legitimate extensions turning malicious. And I'd say at companies, even the most mature security programs that I've seen don't really have like a real-time, long-term visibility into all the different things that I just said of what's going on in their employees' browsers. I mean, we even saw a pretty public breach just recently about a user installing a browser extension with broad permissions that then let the attacker, pivot into Google Workspace and do some gnarly stuff. So, I mean, it's still definitely happening.
Yeah. You mentioned marketplaces. I mean, what would you say to the CISO or security team that says, yeah, but we only let people install extensions from, the Google Marketplace? I mean, aren't we sort of trusting that there are sufficient controls in the marketplace? So if somebody pushes a malicious,
there's no control. There's no control.
Yeah.
When I did my research, and I've still done it, like the extension that I uploaded to the Google Web Store was called like malicious extension. Like, it did nothing legitimate but hack and steal your cookies and like it was a POC and it was on the Chrome Web Store, right? There's very, very little controls. And even if those controls are there, they're not like, there is some review. I don't mean to like completely disparage it, right? But like there is some review and there is a takedown process, but it's not real time. So you still have these legitimate extensions that turn bad. And it's not like no one has the capability to do code review on the entire Chrome Web Store in real time for every change and update.
Continuously. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get a lot of these programs that will even have like an approval process. So say you've got the guardrails and whatever, like you said, like, oh no, we let people install stuff in Chrome. There might be an approval process even where the security team will be involved and say, yes, like you may install this browser extension, but then that's the last time anyone ever looks at it. And you got these malicious updates that wind up getting pushed to these things either on purpose or via, an attack. And who's checking every update to every browser
Right.
extension? Not a lot of people out there are doing that.
Yeah. Which really speaks to, what you're saying about attackers purchasing extensions that were previously legitimate or compromising developer accounts. These things may have undergone some of those initial reviews, I assume, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So the fact that no one is going and following up, or that it's sort of an intractable problem to do at scale continuously, kind of speaks to the exposure there. I think people also underestimate the scale of this as well. You mentioned some testing you had done around uploading an extension. And I mean, I know what we see is that we're talking thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more of these extensions that are just flooding these web stores all the time. So again, getting back to that problem of scale, this is just something that it's unreasonable to outsource to any kind of extension marketplace, web store, anything like that. Um, and I think too, the other fine point that I want to make on this and get your thoughts is that what we have seen in some of our research is this idea of what constitutes a malicious extension or not. And I know there are some vendors out there that will say, well, we're going to flag these things. We're going to assign a risk rating, my personal favorite, the risk rating assigned by a vendor, to say this is bad versus this is not. And I think you really narrowed in on this problem, which is what is malicious and not is really a matter of what day you're asking the question and what the extension is being used for. So I think that's adds some complexity to the problem as well. I'm guessing you've seen that based on all of your comments in practice, where it's like, yes, we have these permissions, maybe relatively small install base if we're using that as maybe one data point, but to say X is a malicious extension and Y is a benign extension, that's a really tough question to answer. Right?
Yeah, it's almost foolish to ask, right? It's like, even like I said, I've seen a lot of security programs that even do like this approval process, and like you said, they have like some arbitrary list of things that they look at to like determine if they're going to let this user install this or not. And I'd say it's mostly based on vibes, right? It's like there's very little science here of like what's going on. It's like, is this a reputable developer? What are the permissions that it's asking for? But like I said, like you're gonna have users that want extensions from small developers with broad permissions. And then what are you going to do? You don't want to be the security team that says no to everything, right? Unless you're in a highly regulated environment, there's very little tolerance for leadership, like for security to be, this roadblocker, right? Like a lot of places, that's the way to make enemies. If you work in like finance or something like that, you could just say no all day. Right? It's like, no, who cares? We're going to slow everyone down because we're in a highly regulated environment. But if you work in most companies, I'd say the vast majority of people that could possibly be listening to this aren't even at the point that we're talking about now, right? They're probably doing nothing. They're probably letting their users install whatever into their browsers, right? Like we're seeing very, very reputable companies with hacks right now in the last couple of weeks that just showcased that there is literally no controls of what their employees are installing from extensions or using from a SaaS perspective, right? Just like signing up for some SaaS app or some AI app or whatever it is, logging in with their Google account and giving these permissions into the organization with no oversight, right? And even the oversight that might exist, like I said, a lot of times I've seen it, it's vibes, right? It's just, yeah, go ahead, use that. I don't want to be the one that tells you no today. And it smells like that's okay right now, right? But then what happens when that thing gets hacked and, whatever it is. So
I think that puts us about at time. Before we go, Matt, anything that you would like to point viewers to in terms of things you've got coming out? I know you've got obviously Vulnerable You newsletter. Anything you want to plug or promote?
Yeah, vulnerable.com, please subscribe. I do a weekly Friday roundup of like all the things in my voice, again, like that very practitioner driven newsletter. I try to, distill down the things that are kind of actionable this week. Not a lot of like breach, just like noise of like, who got hacked this week. I try to talk about like things that we need to either learn a lesson from or react to right now. So that's kind of my philosophy there. Similarly, I do the same on a lot of the social media platforms, the video platforms. So you can find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, shockingly. I talk about security there, and there's an audience for it. But live streaming on YouTube a couple times a week. If you want to come hang out and just ask me questions, talk about stuff, or yeah, check out any of the content I put out. And like I said, it's geared towards practitioners from practitioners. Is like my whole philosophy. So
awesome. And as a current subscriber to many of those channels, +1 for all of Matt's content. While we're plugging things on the cybersecurity leadership side, I also publish a Substack newsletter, which you can check out there. I would argue between my newsletter and all of Matt's content, probably no need for any other news coverage at all. I think we have both angles covered. But thanks and thank you, Matt, for joining today, sharing all of your insights. It was a blast. Really appreciate you coming on. And for those of you who have questions about anything we've discussed, Matt and I will be doing live Q&A following this webcast to speak to anything you want to hear more about or any questions you might have. So Matt, thanks again.
yeah, thanks. Big fan of pushing everything you do. You definitely fall into one of those vendors of like, why doesn't this just work like this without these guys? Which is the highest compliment I could give.
Appreciate it. Thanks everyone. See you next time.